Title: Child Sexual Exploitation Allegations in Oldham, a Comprehensive Report. Introduction. Oldham, a town in Greater Manchester, England, has recently come under scrutiny for allegations involving child sexual exploitation (CSE) and potential cover-ups. These allegations resonate with similar incidents in other UK cities such as Rotherham and Rochdale, where systemic failures to protect vulnerable children have been documented. An independent review commissioned by Oldham Council has cast a harsh light on the town's handling of these sensitive issues, revealing significant failings by both local government and law enforcement. Timeline of key events. 2005. Initial failings are highlighted when Greater Manchester Police GMP fails to inform Oldham Council about serious allegations against a welfare officer, Shabir Ahmed, accused of child sexual abuse. This oversight allows Ahmed to continue working with vulnerable children. 2012, Rotherham's grooming case comes to light, with 9 men convicted for their roles in a child sexual exploitation ring. This case prompts increased scrutiny of similar issues across the region. 2013, growing public and media awareness of CSE leads to concerns expressed by parents and social workers regarding the safety of children in Oldham. 2014, the Rotherham inquiry reveals that 1,400 children were victims of sexual exploitation between 1997 and 2013, predominantly involving young white girls and men of Pakistani heritage as perpetrators. 2019, Oldham Council requests an investigation into historical CSE cases, recognizing past inadequacies in addressing these issues. 2022, an independent review is published revealing serious failings in how local authorities and GMP handled cases of child sexual exploitation. The report suggests that officials may have misled members of Parliament regarding their responses to victim concerns. Findings of the independent review. The review, led by child protection experts Malcolm Newsom and Gary Ridgway, indicates that Oldham's police and local government exhibited substantial negligence in protecting vulnerable children. Key findings include: missed opportunities. Multiple chances to prevent abuse were overlooked since 2005, particularly regarding the case of Shabir Ahmed, who was later convicted of multiple rapes. Police and council failings. The report criticizes GMP for a lack of transparency and accountability, describing their approach to victim concerns as less than candid and more focused on protecting their reputation than on acknowledging harm done. No systemic cover-up. While the review does not find evidence of a systematic cover-up, it acknowledges a culture of neglect and indifference towards vulnerable children, leading to abuses that could have been prevented. Public perception. Despite the lack of widespread evidence for organized CSE networks in Oldham, the report confirms that individual cases were present in various settings, including taxi services and local businesses. Comparative analysis with Rotherham and Rochdale. The failings in Oldham are consistent with findings from Rotherham and Rochdale, where authorities similarly failed to act upon reports of child sexual exploitation for years. The Rotherham case in particular saw a shocking number of victims, around 1,400, over a 16-year period. These cases reveal a troubling pattern of prioritizing community cohesion over the protection of vulnerable children, driven by fears of being perceived as racist or discriminatory against specific communities. In Rotherham, reports indicated that many victims were not taken seriously by authorities and their concerns were often dismissed. Similar sentiments emerged in Oldham, highlighting a broader systemic issue across multiple towns in the UK. Government and community responses. In the wake of the review's findings, both Oldham Council and GMP issued public apologies for their past failings. Amanda Chatterton, leader of Oldham Council, acknowledged the inadequacy of their response to victims and recognized the implications of these failures. Chief Constable Stephen Watson of GMP also accepted responsibility, noting that the police force had previously placed organizational reputation above the welfare of victims. The findings have led to calls for significant reforms in how child protection services operate, emphasizing the need for transparency, accountability, and a victim-centered approach. Furthermore, there have been renewed calls for a government inquiry into historical grooming gangs in Oldham, although the safeguarding minister has indicated that such inquiry should be led locally. Conclusion: the allegations of child sexual exploitation in Oldham, alongside the findings of the independent review, underscore a critical need for systemic reforms in child protection and law enforcement practices. The recurring patterns of neglect and indifference toward vulnerable children across various towns serve as a wake-up call to authorities at both local and national levels. Ensuring the safety and protection of children from sexual exploitation must be prioritized above all else, necessitating a collective effort from government officials, law enforcement, and the community at large to combat this pervasive issue. This report serves as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, accountability, and a commitment to justice in protecting the most vulnerable members of society. The lessons learned from Oldham, Rotherham, and Rochdale must inform future practices to ensure that no child suffers in silence again. In the context of child sexual exploitation CSE scandals across the UK, Oldham's situation presents various counterintuitive aspects that challenge common perceptions or assumptions about the nature and scope of these abuses, as well as the responses of authorities. 1. Misleading assumptions about systemic cover-ups. While many reports and narratives surrounding CSE scandals suggest a widespread systemic cover-up by local authorities and police, the independent review of Oldham explicitly states that there was no evidence of a systematic cover-up by the council. This contrasts with the common belief that local governments and police forces are uniformly complicit in hiding the abuse. The report does acknowledge historic failings and mismanagement, which indicates a more nuanced reality where negligence and inaction rather than intentional cover-up were prevalent. 2. Complexity of perpetrator profiles. There's a tendency in public discourse to focus heavily on the ethnicity of perpetrators, particularly in relation to the grooming gang narrative, which often highlights Asian men as disproportionately involved. The Oldham Review indicates that while there were individual cases of exploitation involving men of Pakistani heritage, it does not support the notion of a widespread network similar to those in Rotherham or Rochdale. This suggests that the nature of CSE can vary significantly from one locality to another, thus complicating the narrative that all CSE cases share similar characteristics. 3. Victim blaming dynamics. The inquiry findings reflect a disturbing trend of victim blaming that is often overlooked in discussions about CSE. For instance, victims of grooming gangs in Rotherham were not only failed by the systems meant to protect them but also subjected to moral judgments by authorities. This reflects a broader societal challenge in which vulnerable populations, particularly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, are often deemed unreliable or undeserving of protection. The tendency to overlook the systemic failures in favor of focusing on the victim's behaviors presents a significant counterintuitive dynamic in understanding the complexities of CSE. 4. The role of race and political correctness. The hesitance of authorities to address the ethnic backgrounds of perpetrators for fear of being labeled racist presents a paradox. In striving to protect community relations, authorities may inadvertently perpetuate harm by failing to address the specific nature of the crimes and the cultural dynamics at play. This complicates the narrative around race and CSE, suggesting that attempts to avoid racial profiling can lead to neglect of the very issues that need addressing. 5. Divergent public reactions and perceptions. The public reaction to CSE cases tends to polarize opinions. Some media portrayals and public comments emphasize the race of perpetrators, while others call for a focus on the failures of public institutions irrespective of race. This dichotomy illustrates a counterintuitive tension where discussions about race can overshadow the critical examination of systemic failures in protecting vulnerable children, suggesting that society struggles with reconciling the need for accountability with the risks of racial stereotyping. 6. Perception of police and authority effectiveness. There is a prevalent belief that police forces and local authorities are adequately equipped to handle such crises. However, the reports on Oldham and Rotherham reveal a stark reality where even clear evidence was overlooked or mishandled. The implication is that the belief in the infallibility or effectiveness of these institutions is often misplaced, leading to a dangerous underestimation of the actual risk faced by vulnerable children. 7. The overlap of socioeconomic factors. While the narratives surrounding grooming gangs often focus on ethnic backgrounds, the socio-economic context is frequently downplayed. The reviews highlight that many victims came from marginal backgrounds and that perpetrators exploited these vulnerabilities. The assumption that ethnicity is the primary factor in understanding CSE overlooks the critical role that socioeconomic status plays in both victimization and perpetration, suggesting a need for a more intersectional approach to these issues. In summary, the Oldham case presents a complex interplay of factors that challenge simplistic narratives surrounding child sexual exploitation. These counterintuitive insights highlight the necessity for more nuanced discussions that take into account the specific contexts of each case, the failures of institutions, and the socioeconomic dynamics at play. Instead of viewing CSE through a singular lens, a multifaceted approach is essential for effective prevention and intervention strategies. In the landscape of child sexual exploitation CSE investigations in the UK, the case of Oldham stands out for its troubling parallels with the more infamous scandals in Rotherham and Rochdale. The independent review published in June 2022 revealed significant failings by both the Greater Manchester Police GMP and the Oldham Council, resulting in vulnerable children being left exposed to abuse. While the report has been covered in various media outlets, several critical aspects remain overlooked which merit further exploration due to their implications for systemic change and societal awareness. Key overlooked aspects and their significance. 1. Historical context of failings. The report highlights that the failures in Oldham have roots dating back to 2005. This long-standing neglect raises essential questions about how institutional inertia can perpetuate harm over decades. The case of Shabir Ahmed, a welfare officer convicted of multiple rapes, is particularly striking. The police failed to report significant allegations against him, allowing him continued access to vulnerable children. This historical context is crucial for understanding how systemic issues can lead to a culture of impunity among abusers and inaction among authorities. Significance. Recognizing the historical continuity of these failures emphasizes the need for an ongoing evaluation of child protection systems rather than viewing these issues as isolated incidents. It highlights the importance of transparency and accountability within institutions responsible for safeguarding vulnerable populations. 2. Misleading communication with authorities. The report suggests that senior officials from both GMP and the Council may have misled members of Parliament when denying wrongdoing related to the exploitation of a 12-year-old girl. This aspect speaks to a broader issue of trust and credibility between public institutions and the communities they serve. Significance. This revelation underscores the importance of honesty in official communications, especially regarding matters of child safety. When authorities prioritize their reputations over the truth, they erode public trust, which can further discourage victims from coming forward. 3. Failure to address systemic racism. While the report does not find evidence of a systematic cover-up regarding the ethnicity of offenders, it does expose a hesitance to discuss the ethnic backgrounds of both victims and perpetrators openly. This hesitation reflects a broader societal issue where discussions about race and ethnicity are often fraught with fear of accusations of racism, leading to a culture of silence. Significance. Addressing this reluctance is essential for effective policymaking and community engagement. Acknowledging the intersection of race, class, and child exploitation can lead to more targeted and culturally sensitive interventions to protect vulnerable groups. 4. The role of community and whistleblowers. The report mentions whistleblowers such as former GMP detective Maggie Oliver, who have publicly criticized systemic failures. However, the broader community's role in recognizing and reporting abuse remains underexplored. The dynamics between community leaders, law enforcement, and potential victims are complex, and understanding these relationships is critical in preventing future abuses. Significance: highlighting the experiences and insights of community members can foster a more collaborative approach to child protection. It also encourages the development of grassroots movements that can hold institutions accountable and advocate for victims. 5. Socioeconomic factors. The socioeconomic backgrounds of victims and the broader community context are crucial in understanding CSE. The report touches on these issues but does not delve deeply into how economic vulnerability can exacerbate the risks of exploitation. Many victims come from troubled family backgrounds, which can make them more susceptible to grooming tactics. Significance: acknowledging the socioeconomic dimensions of CSE allows for a more holistic response to prevention and intervention. Policies aimed at improving economic conditions for vulnerable families can be a vital part of a comprehensive strategy to combat exploitation. 6. Need for continuous reform. Both GMP and Oldham Council's acknowledgement of their failings and commitment to improving practices is a step in the right direction. However, the report does not adequately address the necessity for continuous reform and oversight mechanisms to ensure accountability over time. Significance: continuous reform is vital to prevent regression into past failures. Establishing independent oversight bodies that can monitor child protection practices will be essential in maintaining accountability and transparency. Conclusion: the Oldham Child Sexual Exploitation Report serves as a stark reminder of the systemic failures that allow such abuses to persist unchecked. The overlooked aspects of historical neglect, misleading communication, systemic racism, community roles, socioeconomic factors, and the need for continuous reform are critical in understanding the broader implications of this issue. Addressing these areas is not only significant for the current victims but is essential for creating a safer environment for future generations. Acknowledging and acting upon these insights can lead to meaningful changes that prioritize the protection and welfare of vulnerable children across the UK. 1. Failures of local authorities and law enforcement. The case of Oldham reflects a systemic failure similar to that seen in Rotherham and Rochdale, where local authorities and law enforcement agencies failed to protect vulnerable children from child sexual exploitation. CSE reports indicate serious failings by the police and council, with missed opportunities to prevent abuse dating back to 2005. This systemic neglect highlights a broader issue within the UK's child protection framework, where the prioritization of institutional reputation over victim protection led to an environment where abuse could flourish unchecked. 2. Allegations of cover-up and misleading information. The review into Oldham's handling of CSE suggested that senior officials may have misled MPs regarding the extent and nature of the abuse, contributing to a perception of a cover-up. While the report did not find evidence of a systemic cover-up, it pointed to historic failings and a culture of denial among officials. This calls into question the integrity of the responses from local authorities and raises concerns about accountability for those in power who failed to act appropriately. 3. Cultural and socioeconomic dynamics. The discourse surrounding CSE in Oldham, like in other towns, has been complicated by racial and cultural dynamics. The nature and ethnic backgrounds of both victims and perpetrators have influenced public perception and discourse. While some reports emphasize the role of specific ethnic groups in CSE, others highlight the importance of understanding the socioeconomic contexts that contribute to exploitation. The narratives around these cases have often been polarized, leading to a lack of comprehensive understanding of the issue. 4. Call for systemic reform and accountability. The Oldham case has sparked a renewed call for systemic reforms in child protection policies and practices across the UK. The acknowledgement by local authorities and law enforcement of their failures and the subsequent apologies indicate a recognition of the need for change. However, without concrete actions that prioritize victim support, accountability, and a shift in organizational culture, the potential for similar failures in the future remains a concern. This situation advocates for a robust framework that emphasizes transparency training and community engagement in safeguarding vulnerable children. 1. Rotherham Child Sexual Exploitation Scandal 2014. The Rotherham scandal involved the systematic sexual abuse of approximately 1,400 children, mainly young girls, over a period from the late 1990s to 2013. An independent inquiry led by Professor Alexis J. revealed that local authorities, including the police and social services, had failed to act on numerous reports of abuse due to fears of being labeled racist and a culture of indifference towards the victims. The scandal prompted widespread outrage, leading to resignations of key officials, multiple inquiries, and a national debate about child protection and institutional failures. 2. Rochdale Child Sexual Exploitation Scandal 2012. In Rochdale, a grooming gang was convicted of sexually exploiting young girls, with the first convictions occurring in May 2012. The case came to light after a police investigation revealed that a group of men, primarily of Pakistani heritage, had groomed and abused vulnerable girls, some as young as 13. The case highlighted similar themes of neglect and failure to protect victims as seen in Rotherham, leading to a public outcry and demands for reform in the handling of child sexual exploitation cases by authorities. 3. Oxford Child Sexual Exploitation Cases 2013. The Oxford case involved a group of men who groomed and sexually exploited young girls, some of whom were in care. The abuse was reported as widespread, with the victims often being targeted due to their vulnerability. In 2013, an inquiry led to the conviction of several men for their roles in the exploitation. Similar to Rotherham and Rochdale, the Oxford scandal brought attention to the systemic failures of local authorities and law enforcement in addressing child sexual exploitation, prompting calls for better safeguarding measures and accountability for those in power. The future outlook for Oldham, particularly in the context of child sexual exploitation (CSE), hinges on various factors including societal response, institutional reforms, community engagement, and government policy. Given the town's troubled history with CSE similar to Rotherham and Rochdale, here are some predictions for the future. 1. Increased accountability and transparency. Following the past scrutiny of local authorities and police, there is likely to be a sustained push for accountability and transparency in handling CSE cases. Independent investigations and public inquiries may become more commonplace, with local councils and police forces facing greater pressure to disclose information and act on recommendations from inquiries. This could be propelled by heightened public awareness and activism against institutional failures. 2. Legislative and policy changes. The British government may introduce stricter laws and policies surrounding child protection and CSE. These could include mandatory reporting requirements for professionals working with children, as well as more rigorous training on identifying and responding to signs of exploitation. Legislative changes could also address gaps in current laws that hinder effective prosecution of offenders. 3. Community engagement and support programs. In response to the scandals, community organizations may become more proactive in advocating for child protection. Initiatives aimed at educating parents, children, and local businesses about the signs of CSE can be expected. Support programs for victims and survivors are likely to expand, focusing on rehabilitation, mental health, and reintegration into society. 4. Technological advancements in monitoring and reporting. The use of technology in monitoring and reporting CSE cases may increase. Local authorities could implement systems that allow for anonymous reporting of suspected cases alongside tools that help track offenders. Greater use of data analytics could also assist in identifying patterns of abuse and response effectiveness. 5. Cultural shifts in attitudes towards victims. There may be a cultural shift in how society views victims of CSE. Efforts to destigmatize victims and prioritize their voices in the conversation around abuse are likely to grow. This could foster an environment where victims feel empowered to come forward and seek help without fear of judgment. 6. Collaborative approaches between agencies. Future responses to CSE in Oldham are likely to emphasize collaborative approaches among law enforcement, social services, and educational institutions. Improved communication and joint training programs may lead to a more coordinated response. Ensuring that vulnerable individuals are identified and supported effectively. 7. Focus on prevention and early intervention. There will likely be a stronger emphasis on prevention and early intervention strategies. This could involve schools implementing programs focused on healthy relationships, consent, and recognizing abusive behaviors. Community outreach efforts may also target at-risk youth to prevent their exploitation. 8. Ongoing scrutiny of institutional practices. Given the past failures, institutions in Oldham will likely face ongoing scrutiny from both the public and advocacy groups. Regular assessments and audits of child protection practices may become standard, ensuring that lessons are learned and that past mistakes are not repeated. 9. Potential for political and social backlash. While there may be positive changes, there is also the potential for backlash against initiatives perceived as politically correct or that may stir racial or community tensions. Efforts to address CSE must balance sensitivity towards cultural dynamics while firmly addressing abuse and exploitation. 10. Long-term impact on community trust. The legacy of CSE scandals may continue to impact community trust in local authorities and law enforcement. Rebuilding this trust will require consistent and genuine efforts from officials to demonstrate a commitment to protecting children and holding offenders accountable. Conclusion. The future of Oldham regarding CSE will likely be shaped by both reactive measures to past failings and proactive strategies to prevent future abuse. Community involvement, legislative changes, and a commitment to transparency and accountability will be crucial in creating a safer environment for children. The path forward is fraught with challenges, but with concerted efforts, it is possible to foster a culture of vigilance and care that prioritizes the well-being of all children.